You are listening to the Beyond Believing podcast. I am your host, Katie Ann. I am a certified life coach, a divorced mom to 5 amazing children. And I am here to share some love and encouragement with you about healing and moving on post-divorce as a Christian woman. Stick around after the show for some details on how we can work together. You are listening to the Beyond Believing podcast, episode number 39. All right, friends, welcome to episode 39, what I am calling Answered Prayers. And I'm going to start us off a little bit differently this week. Because my social media pages are currently inaccessible, I have created a new community over on Patreon. And I'm actually really excited about this platform because I've been wanting to host a community for each of you, and now I have one. I also created a new YouTube channel, but my Patreon page is where I'm going to have some special members-only perks. Think behind the scenes at my own post-divorce journey, my struggles with co-parenting and how I'm working that out, helping my kids navigate their own journey, as you can imagine, having your mom leave your faith that she has always taught you, now all of a sudden could create a little bit of confusion, and their dad is still a member of the Mormon religion. So that has been an interesting dynamic, teaching them about who God really is, blending families, and what my own amazing man of God and I are creating as we prepare to transition 2 homes into one, and so much more. You can find all of those links in my show notes, so make sure you come and follow me along there and keep up. I actually do have a TikTok channel as well. I created a TikTok account, so I'll have my link in my show notes as well. But if you didn't already know, I am doing a brand new case study that I'm calling Selah Healing. It's designed just for you. It's 12 weeks of private coaching with me where we get crystal clear on how to create the life post-divorce where you wake up excited and at peace every day. You can find all the details for that also in my show notes, and I'm only taking a handful of women. I still have a few seats left, and I'm only going to be offering this for a limited time, so come and join me while you can. All right, let's dive in, friends. I am really excited about this because I was listening to a sermon this week from Voddie Baucham about predestination. He shared the story about Isaac and Rebekah that just struck a chord with me. It made me think, what happens when the prayers you have been praying for come true? And it really isn't what you expected. Reality is never the same as the vision we have in our mind for it. So let me explain. The Israelites are being suppressed in Egypt, right? They are slaves and they are begging and praying for relief, for freedom, to be saved, right? But then they are saved through a series of amazing miracles. Then they realize this isn't what we signed up for. And they start to complain, and they actually believe many, many times that it would have been better for them to have stayed in Egypt. Can you even comprehend? We read this and we think that they're ungrateful and selfish, but in reality, we aren't very different. Abraham is promised by God the Father to be a father of nations, so great they can't be numbered. But Sarah is barren and past the age of childbearing. Isaac receives the same promise from Abraham. He is past that promise from his father, but Rebekah is barren for 20 years. How many times, friends, do you get to a spot where you realize you have exactly what you've prayed for and it isn't anything like what you thought it was, and you find yourself longing and looking for the past? That is how you're being the same as the Israelites. I think this is such an interesting concept. So we're going to dive into this today. So Rebekah waits 20 years. This is the story that I think is just fascinating, and it got me really thinking. But then she gets pregnant, not just pregnant, but now she's pregnant with twins that are so active in her womb. She asks God if something is wrong. It is this story, like I said, that really got me thinking about fulfilled promises and answered prayers. In this season post-divorce, how long did you wish to find a husband? And then you got one. And then you found out this actually isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. Or how long did you wait to start a family? Or were you longing to be a mom? I will tell you, I wanted to be a mom for as long as I can remember. Like my entire life, all I ever wanted was to be a mom. I'm pretty sure that's like the only thing. People would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I would always say, I want to be a mom. I think like my earliest memory, I think I was around 4. When I started telling people that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. But ironically, I never said I wanted to be a wife. I just wanted to be a mom. And looking back, I can see how this was out of order and it got me off track as I sought out a husband. And perhaps some of the consequences of the dynamics of being a child of divorce really caused. I actually had no desire ever to have a husband except for the fact that I had to have a husband in order to be a mom. I knew that was a requirement to step along the way. But the point is, we all paint a picture of what it will be like to have the desires of our hearts. And rarely is that picture the same one that God has for us. Last week, I shared in 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 8, which taught us that God will instill in us his divine power based on our knowledge of him. What I love about this that I didn't share last week that I wanted to touch on is the New American Standard Bible says the true knowledge of him. I bring this up because before we go any further, I think this is something that's really important to understand. We must know the true God in order to develop the fruits of his Spirit in our lives. So how does one know the true God? I thought I knew the true God my entire life until I realized I didn't know anything about the true God. Friends, can I just tell you, having this realization shook me to my core. Could you imagine waking up one day and someone telling you that everything you had been taught about God was wrong? That you had been taught about religion or your beliefs were incorrect? This was where I was. I will say this was one of my answered prayers. I had been seeking God. I knew I needed him. I thought I had him, but I was so desperate to be wherever he wanted me to be and to be whoever he wanted me to be that I was finally willing to question everything I thought I knew. So let's define how not to know the true God. You do not come to know God by listening to other people's definition of him. You do not come to know the true God by creating him in your mind or heart. You don't get to just decide who he is. There are not multiple versions of the true God. We do not each have our own idea of who the true God is unless they all point us to the actual true God. But you do not just feel him in your heart. The true God can only be known by reading and studying his true gospel. And this was how I learned I did not know who he was, because I finally started reading his word. And when I talk about his word, I mean the Bible. I started reading the Bible, and then I started seeing that the things he was saying and who I was reading about was not the picture I had been taught to understand him to be. When you read his word, you learn about his true nature, his true character, and his true identity. If you want to know the true God, if you want to really know him, go open your Bible and let him reveal himself to you. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, we can get back to this idea of God answering our prayers, because we can't receive answers to prayers without knowing who we are receiving them from and who it is that's giving them to us. You just can't fully comprehend. And as I look back, I'll be sharing a little bit later a specific example of a prayer that God had answered for me. This was something that I wrestled with in coming to my new understanding of God is I know God. I know I've seen him in my life. I know I have been the recipient of his love and grace. And what I've come to understand is it's just common grace. I was the recipient of common grace, which we all are. And now that I know him personally, the true God, I receive so much more pointed direction, so much bigger blessings. It's amazing. So continuing on. When I was growing up, Garth Brooks was the artist everyone was listening to. And if you just got a little excited by me saying Garth Brooks, I want to tell you, I got a little excited talking about Garth Brooks. I was thinking of his songs that I used to listen to, and they're playing in my head because I had all of his tapes. Yes, tapes, friends. I'm really confident that you know what those are if you are listening to this podcast. Those were the good old days. Am I right? I think I am. Remember getting your tape stuck, just sidetrack here. Remember getting your tape stuck in your tape deck and having to wind the film back up? Yeah. Could you even imagine? We never would have imagined in that stage where we were that we would be able to listen to just about anything we wanted from a phone that we carried in our hand back in those days, right? Okay. I totally digress, but I just got a little excited of that little memory there. So Garth Brooks had pretty much all my favorite songs. I mean, besides Gangster's Paradise, but we're sticking with Garth Brooks for right now. This song I'm thinking about that's relevant to this episode is called Unanswered Prayers. You know it, right? Is it just playing in your head now? Because I kind of wanted to just go listen to this. I could sing the whole dang thing if I had a voice that was worth you listening to. But I'm not going to do that to you. His song, Unanswered Prayers, he shares a story of running into his high school sweetheart after he'd been married for several years to his wife. And looking back, he realized how grateful he was that God did not answer his prayer for him to have married that high school sweetheart. So his chorus says, "Sometimes I thank God for unanswered prayers. Remember when you're talking to the man upstairs. Just because he may not answer doesn't mean he don't care. Some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers." Now, there are many, many things that we get to create, friends. I think that you have the ability and the power to decide each and every single moment of every single hour of every single day what kind of experience you're going to have and what kind of experience you're going to create. And quite honestly, in the long run, you get to decide what kind of relationships you're going to have, how you show up in those specific relationships, how you show up in each and every situation, who you are going to be, and how we experience life in general and specifically. But everything outside of our control is up to God. We do not get to decide the way other people show up. We do not get to have control over who comes into our lives or out of our lives. Just thinking about marriage in general, you have a lot of control about who you showed up and how you were as the wife in that relationship, but you didn't get to control the husband that you had. You got to choose which husband you yoked yourself with, and you got to choose whether or not to stay or keep that relationship, but you did not get to choose whether he chose that as well. So back to Isaac and Rebekah. How forgotten do you think they felt by God? Or Abraham? I mean, they were in their 90s before Sarah had Isaac. And what about David? He was to be a king, yet he was hiding and running for his life for 15 years. 15 years. I mean, I think about the last week. It's been 11 days of me being locked out of my social media and trying to figure out a new thing. And I'm like, God, have you forgotten me? No, I know you haven't forgotten me. I know you have a plan for me, but I have a timeline. Maybe you have a timeline. Could it not be 15 years? Maybe, but the list is truly endless. I'm sure you have a long list yourself of prayers you are waiting for God to answer, or you can look back at your life and see how God answered the prayers in a way you never imagined. So I'm listening to this sermon by Vodi Bakum about this seemingly unanswered promise for Isaac to be the father of many nations. And Rebekah gets pregnant. Imagine their joy. If you have had to wait, if you have struggled with infertility, I know you know. And I just think God is so amazing that he puts these examples for us in the Bible to help us have perspective. Like, we're never suffering alone, and this isn't a new problem we're struggling with. Rebekah gets pregnant, and then she's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Something is wrong. For those of you who have had twins, I know you know what she's dealing with. I mean, I can imagine what she's dealing with, which is one baby. I've had very active babies, but to be so tumultuous that you're like, hey, Lord, something's not right here. Side note, can you even imagine having babies in this time period? We are so spoiled with our ultrasounds and fancy technologies that let us see inside our womb. I mean, I'm sure they had incredible midwives that had experience, so they knew or had a great idea of what was happening. But here Rebekah's like, why is this happening to me? She literally says that. Why is this happening to me? Isaac's prayer is answered. His wife conceives. And I'm sure that was her prayer as well. But here, God is blessing her, and she says in Genesis 25:22, why is this happening to me? Can you just imagine that her saying, this isn't what I signed up for? I asked for a baby. I asked to bring prosperity. And, you do understand, right? You do understand some things are going to be happening in the decisions you're making and in the things that you're praying for. Like, you understand there's going to be dynamics. I will tell you, before I ever made the decision to get divorced, and I will tell you, I was married for 17 years, and I stayed married most of that time to avoid divorce because I didn't want to put my children through what I had experienced. I played out every single possible scenario for years in my mind. What is this going to be like for my children? What is this going to be like for me? I watched my mom struggle through single years and dating and then remarriage and blending families. And I'm like, Lord, I would like to avoid this, please. So there are a lot of times when you're making very educated decisions, very educated prayers, and you understand there's going to be a lot of unknowns, but there's a lot of stuff you do know that you would like to not have to experience. And, that makes me think about Christ asking for the cup to be removed. He knew this was his role. He knew this was what he was called to do. And yet he still was like, but if you could possibly take this away, that'd be great. But nevertheless, not my will, but yours. So we can say that. We can say, I know I'm here, Lord. I know this is what I need to be doing. If it's possible for me not to have to experience this, that would be great. But if not, I totally surrender to you. You prayed for a husband. You find him. You get married, and it's supposed to be, quote unquote, happily ever after, right? And I'm just convinced this is one of the greatest lies in our culture today, by the way. But all of a sudden reality hits. You find yourself crying out to God, why is this happening to me? This isn't what I thought it was going to be. Or maybe it was motherhood. Maybe it was a different event or experience in your life that you were waiting for, that you arrived and you were like, why is this happening? I am confident you have prayed earnestly for a godly desire on your heart, only to receive it and realize it isn't anything like what you thought it was going to be. So then what do? Do you complain like the Israelites and ask to go back to what you once knew? Or do you turn to the Lord and seek his guidance and direction like Rebekah does? It is just our default nature to believe that whatever we do not have yet is going to provide the solution to all our problems. But that isn't God's nature, and that isn't God's plan. God isn't answering our prayers to solve all our problems. He doesn't show up with a gold platter with all your wishes and desires on it. There is no pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. In fact, if there is one, I'm pretty sure it's full of more problems than solutions. God provides holiness, righteousness. He is holy, holy, holy. I was thinking about the prayers of my own that he's answered. And I realized something that humbled me to my core. I was only caught off guard or disappointed or struggling or finding myself asking, why is this happening? This isn't quite what I was expecting. To the prayers of mine he answered when I set my own expectations outside of God's plan for me. When I painted a picture of what I expected God to provide for me in the way I wanted it, rather than the way he had designed. The times God answered prayers of mine that left me speechless and in awe of his majesty and power and knowledge of my most intimate desires and my soul, those times, friends, I had absolutely no expectation of the outcome. And this really just hit me this last week as I was thinking about this. And can I just share one example? And this is from a time when I was still very active in Mormonism. This was what I would refer, or what you would call, common grace of God in my life. And I will say, while I recognize that God's hand was in this, I still did not recognize his majesty the way I do now. So just want to get that little caveat away. So I have a 16-year-old daughter who is profoundly deaf. If you don't know what that means, it means she has zero hearing. So there's levels of hearing that were all rated. And when you lose your hearing or do not have hearing, it's rated on a scale, and hers is profound, which is the highest rating. She basically could not hear a jet engine if it was sitting next to her. I found out when she was 7 weeks old that she had absolutely zero hearing. And I drove away from that appointment where I was given her diagnosis, completely humbled that God trusted me to raise this child, utterly and completely shook to my core at this responsibility he had blessed me with. Now, the miracles I was the recipient of while she was a baby and a child are truly endless, but there's one that really stands out to me that still truly brings me to tears. When she was going into the 4th grade, we were moving her from the school for the deaf to the public school in our neighborhood. Now, there are a lot of factors that led us to that decision, most of which are not appropriate for me to disclose publicly on this platform, but I will say nervous is an understatement for how I was feeling about this transition. She uses American Sign Language solely to communicate. She does not utilize any hearing devices or technology. Her only way to communicate is visually tactily with her hands. Socially, it is difficult to track conversations unless people are taking turns talking, which she was 10 at this time, and 10-year-old girls, or girls at any age, to be honest, are not naturally prone to be taking turns while they're talking. Educationally for her, not having the material presented to her in her native language of American Sign Language gets confusing. She has to increase her vocabulary. She has to learn extra English so she understands the context. So much more. Praying for a miracle is exactly what I was doing at this point, and a lot of guidance from God. Now, just prior to her placement meeting with this public school, we found out that the teacher my daughter was assigned to have was in her first year of teaching because she had previously been working as an American Sign Language interpreter for the district. And the interpreter assigned to her had done her internship with this exact teacher. If you do not have a child with special needs, let me just kind of explain how big of a deal this is. So being an ASL interpreter, American Sign Language, is we'd say ASL, requires you to study deaf culture, their community, and understand the dynamics of communicating and advocating for the person you're interpreting for. This teacher, because she had been an interpreter, knew the educational laws required to be met for our daughter in the classroom, which she advocated for us to have. Having an interpreter who had already learned and studied with another interpreter means she was familiar with this teacher's signing style. They had a rapport established and they knew how each other spoke and signed already. And in the deaf culture, each person signs uniquely. So each state and each region and even country has their own version of signs. And it takes a little bit of time to learn each person's style. It's kind of like learning slang or someone's accent. So the fact that this teacher had this background, that the interpreter and the teacher had this rapport established and they'd already worked together, and they had just happened to be assigned to this school in our neighborhood and had room for an extra student required that they were both available, required a series of events to occur long before we ever made the decision to move our daughter. Like years of preparation had to go into play in order for this to work out. It still humbles me to think of the number of series of events that had to occur in exactly the right time, in exactly the right place, in exactly the right way in order for this to happen. And that wasn't even all of the miracles we experienced. That was just the main one. My point here is that when you pray and allow God to do his work, when you surrender control of the outcome, and submit to God's will, he can do so much more for you than you can comprehend or even imagine to ask for. As I shared last week about learning to surrender and submit to God, this week, this reminder has been front and center for me, especially as I face what appears to be God closing a door for me that I thought was the way for me to be doing this work. I originally started putting together a new plan. And I listened to this sermon by Vodi, and I was reminded that God is greater than anything I can imagine up on my own. And when I surrender completely to him and allow him to answer my prayers in his way, in his timing, I am never disappointed. In fact, I'm left speechless, in awe of what he does. And I will choose that over my own plan today, tomorrow, and every day on my own. And I pray you do too. Have a great day, friends. You have been listening to the Beyond Believing podcast, and if you liked anything you heard today, I want to invite you to come and work with me privately. This month, I'm starting up a brand new Selah Healing case study group, and I'm looking for a handful of new women to mentor and work closely with. This invitation is very time sensitive, and I won't be able to offer this kind of personalized coaching and access to me for much longer. If this sounds like something you are interested in, find all the details at the link in my bio. I can't wait to hear from you.